Welcome to another edition of Black and Azul, now in our 28th episode. The Quakes win their 13th match. Excuse me, let me back up for a second. 13 matches unbeaten. But the big news, the big story, we have some reporting as we come on the air this evening from our colleague Joel Soria, who's not here with us. Alex Morgan, Jamon Moore, Charles Wollin with you, and Jamon, yep. you found out some information about Matias Almeida and his suspension.
We did, and really it's been kind of a situation all week long where the Quakes have been waiting to get the information from the league. So originally they were told they would have the information on Sunday, they didn't have it. Thought they were going to get it on Monday, didn't get it Tuesday, and now it's Wednesday. Disco came out today. Nothing specifically mentioned in the Disco report. So what we have confirmed is that Matias Almeida is suspended for this weekend's match. That is confirmed. What we also now have just confirmed right before we went on the air, and apologies for the late start, is that it should be the final game of his suspension. So the expectation at this point is that this will be the final game of the suspension. We've got it from a source close to the league, thanks to Joel Soria. So we think that this will be the second and the final match of his suspension.
My thing here, though, guys, is this has been a little bit not as transparent as I feel like some fans truly deserve. You know, there was a lot going on last week with what happened, what didn't happen, etc. And you know, I think that we kind of fall in a little bit of a trap as disservice to fans, because I think you've seen other managers get their suspension and their marching orders right away. Why wait? Why have this weird, mysterious thing? I'm in a category where I'd like to know where the manager stands, especially because this team is doing well. This team has momentum. This team is behind this manager, and so are the fans. And so it's a bit laughable that there's not as much transparent information about this.
It's a bizarre situation the way it's been handled. And still, in fact, there's no official word from the league or the Quakes. But according to our Joel Soria's sources, it is a 2-game suspension. Matias will be missing against Vancouver, and that is the full extent of the suspension. But you're right in that it's not been a transparent process. It seemed as if the Quakes were expecting Matias to be able to speak to the media this morning. In fact, he was not. He's not spoken to the media while he's been serving his suspension. So it's been a bizarre situation, and I have to imagine that it's played on the team's mind a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And so now they were without him last weekend. They'll be without him this weekend. But again, we believe that we're coming to the final game of the suspension. So as the Quakes go back on the road for some crucial matches against some very tough opponents, they do expect to have Almeida on the sideline once again.
So there you have it. Matias Almeida suspended for another game against Orlando City at home. Hopefully we will see him back after the international break resumes. But let's backtrack just a little bit and chat about the Vancouver match. The Quakes defeating Vancouver by a scoreline of 3-1. Rios getting his first goal in San Jose Earthquakes colors, and same thing for Judson. A lot to say about those two players. We'll go and talk about the players individually, but the biggest story is the Earthquakes break the MLS number of shots in a game record, as well as Vancouver's goalkeeper, the most amount of saves in a match. A lot of statistics in this game to break down, Alex.
Seriously, it was ridiculous. 43 shots it was for the San Jose Earthquakes against the Vancouver Whitecaps this weekend. That is a new MLS record. After some digging, I believe that we found the previous record was 38 shots. Set back in 1998, we had to bring out some of the old record books there. And that wasn't the only record, in fact. They set a bunch of records. Perhaps it was a record for the number of records set. They had the most shots on goal in a single game in MLS history, 19. The most shots in a first half in MLS, 25. So they were, in fact, on track for 50. And then the most saves forced by a goalkeeper, as you mentioned, that's 16. And then also the most shots by a team in a 2-game span, 65. They had 22 against LAFC midweek, and then 43 against Vancouver. And I have to imagine that they're on track to potentially set the record for the most shots in a whole season had by any team.
I think they've got to be on track for something along those lines. This is actually the third time this season, I believe, that they've broken the 2-game mark. And so they've shown time and time again that they're capable of stringing this together for multiple games in a row. But now they face the road test, and we will have to see after Orlando City what's going to be able to happen with the team. Are they going to be able to keep up this run of form? And I guess the first answer is going to come against Orlando City this weekend. But first, breaking down the Vancouver match in a little bit more detail. Chris Wondolowski, by the way, also extended a couple records. His MLS total goals scoring record as well as his game-winning goals record. So congratulations to Chris for that. He also has more goals against the Vancouver Whitecaps than any other player in MLS history. So there's that as well.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. I actually didn't know that. That's Jamon Moore.
Extra stuff.
with the stats. Always going to get it. Let's talk about some individual performances. Let's start with Judson, who scored his first goal in Quakes colors. He was phenomenal on the night, all over the pitch. I'm one of the biggest fans of him. I don't think that the Quakes are in this situation without Judson. He is the metronome. He is the guy that makes them tick. There's not a lot of other players that can do what Judson does. And it's very, very special to have a player like Judson. And on the Quakes website just a couple days ago, Jake Pisani, the head of PR, wrote a nice little article about Judson, comparing him to the N'Golo Kante, who plays for the French national team, and Chelsea in the defensive midfield position. But it is just so admirable to see what he does. He picks the ball up so deep, when the goalkeeper has the ball and the center backs are split, as if the center backs are the right back and the left back, and he is always the point man for getting on the ball, and he wants the ball, and he just keeps working hard. There was a point in the second half where he took the ball and he juggled it over one of the Vancouver players' heads. But credit to him for getting the first goal. A joy to really watch him play. Of course, a defensive midfield player isn't going to score a goal every single game, but Judson is the guy that makes them tick, the 20 to 30-yard runs laterally across central midfield to cut out attacks from other teams. He's the first guy that's responsible to do that. And so, for me, he just had a phenomenal game.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct, Charles. Starting quality player, and he has totally erased those doubts and answered those critics. He's formed a really strong bond with Jackson Newell in the middle, Judson covering more of the defensive ground and Jackson spraying passes forward. But then again, as we see against Vancouver, Judson getting up further in the attack and providing a much-needed goal. Had sort of stunned the Quakes a little bit, having had 3 consecutive losses, 4 matches without a win, then going down early, allowing a goal with a defensive lapse against Vancouver. They were sort of stunned, and Judson went immediately back up the other end of the pitch less than a minute later and got on the score sheet, and that was sort of the goal that turned things around for the Quakes and got them going again.
Something we hadn't seen from Judson really this season was the ability to be able to make that forward run and be able to get that far forward and to be able to receive a ball and get a shot like that. He's been taking his shots, but he's been doing it quite a bit from distance. In fact, if you watch some of his highlights, his career highlights, as we did coming into the season, from the offensive side, that's what you saw him do a lot, was take those distance shots. And they haven't been all that accurate, to be honest. But this was really good to see that he's got this type of skill set, and I would like to see more of it from him. I'd like to be able to see a little bit more of those deep-lying runs. I do think that it's a good way for the Quakes to change up their offense a little bit with the way that things had been going offensively, to get 3 on the score sheet, yes, against Vancouver, obviously, but really this is more about believing in the system again, getting the confidence back. After 4 games without a win, it was very important to rebuild that confidence, and now they can take that confidence in against Orlando City, who is not sitting in a playoff position in the East, but they're not out of it either. They still need to get some points, and they're going to definitely come against the Quakes with a lot of gusto, I think, this weekend.
Yeah, I think your analysis about talking about Judson getting into the final third is, something that maybe Matias Almeida is probably working on in training, and maybe having Jackson sit in a little bit, rotating. If he's able to go up, Jackson will sit in a little bit. And you actually, bring it back to N'Golo Kante. You actually see N'Golo Kante start to do that a little bit more for Chelsea as Jorginho is the sitting player and N'Golo Kante moves forward. And so what your comment just reminded me a little bit, about that as well. And so very much in the same mold, those two players. Let's chat about the trio of Rios, Chris Wondolowski, Magnus Eriksson, Wando, of course, scoring a goal for the Quakes. And Eriksson with 2 assists, and Rios with his debut goal. And Rios' goal so well taken, and basically to put the game out of reach for Vancouver. A really nice layoff from Magnus as well.
Look, finishing was one of the problems the Quakes have had this season. They had 43 shots, only managed to finish 3. But then Rios comes on and he scores with his first shot of the match with that clinical touch. I thought it was a really promising performance from Rios. He slotted right under Chris Wondolowski in a sort of 10 position, and he was doing a lot of hold-up play, distributing the ball to the wide areas and then letting Wando run in behind and exploiting the spaces that he creates. And I think that's a really promising look that could give the Quakes more dynamism and more options going forward in the future, and something that we could even see this weekend against Vancouver. Orlando.
And Magnus Eriksson didn't leave the pitch when Rios came on. He actually went over to the right, and he was continuing to be able to add to the attack from that side. And I think that could be a foreshadowing of things that we're going to see as this team goes through some national team changes, which we'll cover later in the episode.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there was a comment a little bit earlier that I was able to respond to before we went on air from our friend Devin, and he wrote, for the next Black and Azul podcast, how crucial is Magnus to the squad? Though observations that we struggled with offensive third passing versus LAFC without him, then he's a starter versus Vancouver Whitecaps, and we shine offensively. Coincidence? So I know you got some stats on.
No,
this,
absolutely not coincidence. So one of the things that I would encourage people to go back and do is to take a look at some of the statistics. I'm pulling it up right now. That's what I'm looking at here. Is I'm going to go back to July 1st, and so we're going to look at basically the last couple of months here. And if you take a look at AmericanSoccerAnalysis.com, you want to go to their interactive tables. You can go to the player expected goals area. And sort on the Earthquakes, you can see the same information that I'm going to bring up here. So over the last 2 months, Magnus Eriksson sits at the top of the Quakes' offensive production in 2 very, very key categories, which is expected goals and expected assists. Now, when we look at advanced soccer analytics, the expected goals is considered the linchpin of most of the advanced type models that people use to analyze soccer in 2019. And one thing that you can look at is both expected goals plus expected assists to see who's not only scoring goals or should be scoring goals if they're in the right situations, but also who is feeding the people who are getting the goals. Magnus Eriksson leads this team in expected goals plus expected assists with 6.1 since July 1st. He also has contributed around 2.10 expected points. 2.10 expected points. 2.1.
There are 3 points that separate second and seventh in Major League Soccer table right now, so it's hard to overstate the importance of that.
So of the points that the Quakes have been able to achieve over the past 2 months, based upon the offensive production provided by Magnus Eriksson, he can almost account for a win by himself. That's how important he has been to this team. So those are good indicators that Magnus is becoming a more important part of this team, because if you go back to the earlier part of the season, he's not leading those categories. Also, in that time, he has 39 key passes. 39 times he has fed the shot. So yes, he is a very key person in this attack right now. And I do not think that just because Rios is going to get his opportunity, we're going to see Magnus step off the pitch. Yes, that happened against LAFC. Absolutely. Everybody needs a bit of a breather. Everyone cannot play every single game at this point, or they're going to burn out down the stretch with the style that the Quakes play.
And he's started 25 of 27 games for the Quakes so far this year, so he hasn't had many breathers.
Yeah, so Magnus Eriksson, without a doubt, a key part of the Quakes offense, particularly in the last 2 months where they've seen their best offensive production of the season.
And we've talked about him time and time again on this program. And the beginning of the year, I think I may have said that it was going to be Magnus Eriksson's breakout year, and I believe Joel Soria did concur. But playing in this position, it may not be always the stats, and I know I've said B- or C+ or B.
There are the stats
B
too.
And B+. But at the end of the day, it's the little things that he does well. It's the little flicks, it's the little passes, it's the ability to open up space. And he's kind of resurrected his career after kind of the disaster of last year and kind of maybe almost being the fall guy with Mikel Stare, right?
Yeah. He was on the outs over the offseason, and we've talked in the past on the show about how he's really seized an opportunity this year, really seamlessly integrating into Matthias's team and really playing a linchpin part of the squad.
Absolutely. So let's talk about Orlando just a little bit. Orlando, they're kind of peeping up here in the East. They have a chance to make the playoffs. It's a bit muddled in the Eastern Conference, especially at the bottom. They're just about 3 points off of that final playoff spot in there with Toronto, Chicago, Montreal Impact, New England, and DC United, who's at the 5th position. And so, Orlando coming to San Jose, the cross country trip, a coastal trip, always hard. Coming in with Luis Nani, who's a phenomenal player, who's enjoyed his time in Major League Soccer, and what a career he's had, both for the Portuguese national team, for Sporting, for Manchester United as well. He is a big weapon. He's someone that's crucial to their side. But Orlando City, they're trying to get into the playoffs too. Any point's a good point for them. And so, obviously you got to get your points at home if you're the Quakes. But if you can get a point in San Jose for Orlando, it's a big win.
It would absolutely be a big deal for them as of right now. They're right there at the bottom of the East, where there's very few points that are separating those bottom teams in the playoff position in the East. Orlando still right now has the opportunity to be able to get into the playoffs, but they're going to need to find ways to get points. Now, I happened to see Orlando City in person a couple weeks ago in Toronto, and I can tell you that no one, I don't think, is going to feel very scared by this team. Most of their production comes from the forward positions. There's very little that's actually generated out of their midfield. You have Tesho Akindele, you have Nani, you have Dom Dwyer. Most of the people that you know about Orlando play in the forward position. And they don't play all those guys at one time quite frequently. Dom Dwyer's not getting the minutes that he has been overall in previous seasons. And this is where their offensive production is coming from. The other thing that they will try to do is they will try to press out of the back a bit. So as you begin to play out of the back, they will sit back a little bit and they will look for opportunities to steal that pass going forward. And in the game that I saw against Toronto, they stole 3 or 4 passes in that final third area, just kind of sitting back and waiting for someone to not make exactly the right pass, not realize that an Orlando player was present, and then they would step and steal it very quickly. And now they've got a situation where there's only maybe 1 or 2 defenders and a goalkeeper. And those are the type of situations that they thrive on. The other area they thrive on, and they remind me a lot of Colorado in this regard, is on set pieces. So if you take a look at Nani's numbers and you take a look at open play versus set pieces, you can see that most of his production has actually come off of set pieces. And so that's also an area that you have to watch for with Orlando, similarly to how you had to watch for that against Colorado, where that type of production, that's where they can be especially dangerous. And a set piece in the right situation, can change a game. And the Quakes have to be very wary of that.
Yeah, look, 7 games left for the Quakes in this regular season. This has to be one of the must-wins at this point, considering how tight the Western Conference is. And it's there for the taking. They have to be confident coming off this result against Vancouver. It's hard to extrapolate too much from their last 2 matches, given that you're playing the best team in the league and then the worst team in the league. But these are the games they have to start winning, and it's definitely theirs for the taking. Orlando isn't a team that usually keeps too much possession. So you have to imagine at home the Quakes. It'll be another game similar to this Vancouver game we had last weekend, where the Quakes have the edge. But as you say, Jamon, they have to be wary of potentially another lapse at the back.
Yeah, it's very important. And lastly, of course, we also know, as we started off the show, that they're not going to have Matias Almeida. And so the Quakes are going to, it's not going to be Vancouver, right? It's going to be a step up from Vancouver, right? And so they're going to need to be able to commit themselves to the system and play the system that they know without that type of leadership in the box, continuously staying on them in order to stay aggressive. If you watch the coaching staff in the last game, they're pretty passive. They're sitting back a lot. They're getting some instruction, but they're not up there at the front of the coaching area and providing those types of directions that Matias provides, and that the players are going to have to figure out some of this for themselves. I think at this point we should expect they should be able to do that, but it's going to be on the players really to get themselves 3 points. And
to be clear, Matias' suspension is a touchline ban. From what was communicated to us, he is allowed to speak to the team up to an hour and a half before the game, and then sometime after the game, he's allowed to speak to them. So they're going through their normal pre-match video routine, and it's really only in the match, as you say, Jamon, where they're going to need to find that extra bit of leadership on the field themselves without Matias' presence there.
Yep.
3 points on the line at home for the San Jose Earthquakes, unbeaten at Avaya Stadium, or as we call it on the show, Avaya Castle, Avaya Mansion, whatever you want to call it. The Quakes currently 6th in the table. We'll talk playoff odds in a little bit, but again, the Quakes just 2 points behind the second place team, Real Salt Lake, who's on 43. They've got a game in hand above the 7th place team, FC Dallas, who's on 40 points. So chance to go 4 clear above FC Dallas and potentially get into that little top echelon, but it's just so muddled. We are Black and Azul. This is your show too. Make sure that you comment, like, send us a tweet, whatever you want to do. Ask us questions. We will get into questions very soon, I promise you. But we want to give you the details on the national team call-ups and how that's going to affect the starting 11, especially with a huge game coming up after the international break against Real Salt Lake. And Jamon, you had the chance also to speak with Nick Lima on his role with the national team, which there's been a lot written about and discussed. But let's just talk a little bit of the tactics, guys, about how we think the Quakes will line up. Colin Etnier putting out a starting 11 with 6 different absentees of what he thinks is going to be the starting 11, and it doesn't look off the cuff or it's a B team at all. It looks like this team can still really compete.
Yeah, Colin Etnier, friend of the show, of course, writer occasionally for Quakes Epicenter. I thought he did a great job putting together what is a potential starting 11. So if we take a quick look at this, he starts by laying out what the international commitments are at this point. So what you see is Lopez, Kasia, Vaco, Lima, Yule, and Cummings are all the people who are affected by the international absences, which will begin starting around September 2nd. And those will extend through the RSL game, and those players will effectively, some of those end around the 10th, but we're expecting that players will probably not be available to be able to play. So what he's done here is he's put together a starting 11, which looks like Wondolowski up top, Eriksson sitting in his usual spot in the 10, Espinoza out right, Fierro on the left, Godoy and Judson sitting in at the double pivot, and then on the left you have Shea Salinas reprising his role as the left back, Youngworth, Affolter, and Thompson rounding out the rest of the back, and of course Vega in goal. And you're right, it does not, looking at this, you look at the level of talent on the field. Espinoza, Eriksson, Wando, Fierro, Godoy, Judson's been fantastic, over the last few months, right? The only question mark that I think you look at and you go, okay, Salinas at left back last season wasn't so great, but I also submit that Salinas has been much better when called upon to play left back, usually in a sub role for Matias Almeida. I think Matias has given him some better definition to that particular position, and I think Matias has more confidence in Salinas and Shea and himself in that position than he had last season. The other part is Youngworth, of course, everyone's very comfortable with. but it's, Francois Affelter. And really, we saw some decent performances from Francois Affelter earlier in the season when he was called upon. I think the biggest question right now is, what is his fitness level for this type of game? Because when you have both Cummings out and you have Kasia out, he's the logical next person to step into a center back role.
Yeah, I think that's an open question. I believe the last San Jose Earthquakes game he started was a 2-2 draw against FC Dallas earlier this season. And to speak more broadly about the lineup changes, I think Colin's prediction is pretty spot on. There are a couple places where there's a natural replacement in mind, such as center back Affelter stepping in. That's what happened earlier this season. Anibal Godoy playing in the middle. That seems like the natural replacement there. I think the only question is, it'll be a test of how much he's still here with the team and willing to fight for this team, given that he will be leaving the team for Nashville at the end of the season. And then Shea Salinas, I think, a pretty sure bet to start at left back. I'd say the only place where there might be some ambiguity, might be up for grabs, is in that left side, left midfield spot. Colin has Fierro etched in. From what I've seen of Carlos Fierro so far, I'm really not sure if he's ready to be a starting player for the San Jose Earthquakes yet. Matias has talked a lot about trying to get him up to speed, and from everything that we've seen, even against Vancouver this last weekend, where really the whole attack was playing well as a unit. Fierro hasn't yet seemed 100%. So the other option there, we were talking about this before the show, Jamon, would be to put Eriksson out wide, and then starting Rios in that 10 position, and giving how much promise Rios showed against Vancouver. I think that would be a good bet for the Earthquakes, and something I'd like to see, if not in the starting lineup, to see it again once the substitutes come on, like we saw this weekend.
A good chance for Espinoza to move over to the left and be able to allow Eriksson to play in his more natural right side. He's an inverted winger, but that's what he has been. When he was in Sweden and he was the Golden Boot winner and he was bringing the assists, they were mostly coming from that side. So I think it works a bit better to have Eriksson on the right. Espinoza has shown that he can play either side. Yes, he's better on the right, but he's very dangerous on the left as well. And so moving him over to the left. And I think that's a more likely starting lineup. I do Matias is more likely to start the RSL game.
But look, this is an RSL team that's in second place. They're trending well. Their odds of making the playoffs at this point are looking very good, as we might discuss later in the show. And I think this is a really bad time for the Quakes to lose 6 or 7 of their starting players. And one of those guys is Jackson Ewell, a stat that was shared with us by the team after. Earlier this week was that the Quakes are 12-5-5 when he starts, and only haven't won a game, all 5 losses when he doesn't start. Part of that is obviously he didn't start the first 4 games that were losses, but I think it also goes to show how important he's been for this team. Taking him out of that central midfield role might unbalance them a little bit.
Yeah, so one positive thing for the Quakes in this game is RSL is going to have a couple of their own losses as well. As Jefferson Severino, I believe, has been called into Venezuela. Need to double check on that one, but I believe he has. And then Corey Baird has also been called into the U.S. national team. So that, if true for Severino, would take a couple weapons off the field for RSL. In fact, a couple of their more potent offensive weapons for sure. Severino has been one of the top.
We have the word on Severino.
He is called up. Okay, so there you go.
Fact check.
So that's an important one, that basically 2 of their 4 biggest offensive weapons are actually going to be taken off of the pitch. The Earthquakes, yes, they're losing Jackson Ewell and they're losing Nick Lima, which are both important pieces, and yes, they're losing a center back. But from an offensive side of the ball, they're actually really not losing the weapons that they have offensively to be able to attack forward. These are important pieces that are going to be departing the team, and particularly on the defensive side. But they're not pieces that are irreplaceable. And I think that RSL actually might be hurting a little bit more from their call-ups than the Quakes may be able to be hurting from their call-ups, because I believe the Quakes are a deeper team than RSL is. And if you just take a look at the spread of the numbers and the way that the season has played for both teams, you'll see that the Quakes tend to spread their numbers a bit better than RSL, and that means that overall they're, I believe, a deeper team.
Yep, and I think on the road the Quakes won't get as many chances as they've had in these last couple games. So then the question becomes, can they finish them? I think Chris Wondolowski said it was the word he used was their bugaboo. These last couple of weeks, I like that word choice. And so on the road, that'll be, I think, partly what could be a deciding factor against RSL.
But let's also talk about the positives here, because I think what we do have is we've got two players, and for those of us that are U.S. national team fans, we've got two players from this team that have been brought into a group of 26. This is a very important call-up, and I want to set the stage as to why this particular call-up, I think, is an important one for everything moving forward now, because the next thing that is going to happen with the U.S. national team is CONCACAF Nations League. And now how qualifying happens from CONCACAF for the 2022 Men's FIFA World Cup is going to be determined, in part at least, by the results from CONCACAF Nations League. Now, I don't know all the details around that. Personally, I haven't really fully looked into it, but they are connected. And so from a qualifying perspective, they're going to start to play in some games that are going to have meaning to teams they're going to play against. Whether or not they mean a lot to the United States and to teams like Mexico and potentially to someone like a Costa Rica, it may matter less too. But for these smaller nations, they're going to have a lot more meaning. And so these two friendlies here, I think, are going to give Greg Berhalter some important information in terms of his roster for CONCACAF Nations League, and this is basically the start of the World Cup qualifying cycle. It's a good indicator who he's looking at to potentially be part of World Cup qualifying. And congratulations to Nick, congratulations to Jackson, because I think they're both deserving of this. I think what's really interesting, I sat down with Nick Lima for a few minutes today, had a one-on-one with him. Hopefully an article will be shared on the Quakes Epicenter site coming from our discussion today. But he was very much understanding that he's walking into a situation where he's got very heavy competition at the outside back spot. Not only do we have people like Tyler Adams, who is not fit yet and not able to play. Not only is DeAndre Yedlin also not fit and unable to play, and those are two people who aren't even there, but there he's got Reggie Cannon, who effectively usurped his spot that he should have had in the Gold Cup and took that spot by the end of the Gold Cup, and he's going to need to win that spot back. The other player who's now coming in is Dest, Serginho Dest. He is potentially a special player. He is a Ajax youth player who is now getting actual games for the senior team at Ajax, and he's a U20 youth international. He's got an amazing highlight reel that I think is worth seeing. I've put a link to it in the article if you haven't seen his highlights yet. I believe that he potentially is a special player. This is now Nick Lima's competition, right? Now Paxton Pomykal, who we've talked about on the show before, is a special player for FC Dallas. He's been adding into that. It's a bit of additional competition for Jackson Yueill. So some of these younger players are now finally getting their opportunity, and it's going to be time for Jackson and Nick to really step their game up, and I'm very interested to see how this all plays out.
And Nick's in an interesting situation at the club level, too. We've talked about this before. He did not start against Vancouver this weekend. That was, we were told, a coach's tactical decision. So he's not the current starting fullback for the San Jose Earthquakes. So he really needs to make a statement for himself, maybe more than some of the other players in this national team camp.
Yeah, and one other quick thing, I did ask Nick Lima, and this is a bonus for Black and Azul viewers here. I asked him specifically, have you talked to Greg Berhalter about the potential of playing left back? And he answered the question directly, no. Now, I pressed him a little bit more, which is to say, is that a conversation that you would like to happen? His response was this: I want to focus on helping this country win in any way I can. If he sees that I can do it on the left, I know he sees I play there on a weekly basis here in San Jose, and if that's where my number is called on the national team, yeah, I'll go out there and do it 100%. But I didn't get the sense that he really wants to go in there and win that left back spot. I really got the sense that if he had his way, he would go in there and he would outright win a position as a right back. And so I do think that this is a really important national team cycle for these two guys.
Or a right wing back, or maybe as a defensive midfielder, or as a right winger. I mean, the call-ups that you just mentioned are really interesting, because I think that a lot of these players are very unconventional for their specific roles, and they're unique and they're one of a kind. They're not like, hey, here's your traditional right back, or hey, here's your traditional center back, or hey, here's your traditional left back. Those roles are changing, and in Berhalter's system, as you know, he likes to play 3 in the back sometimes, move out one of the outside backs and play 2 defensive midfield players and just press with the rest of the 5. And so, you know, what I find very interesting about this is that, and from Nick Lima's comments, I can tell, and the conversation that you had, I can tell he's up for whatever. He's interested in being morphed into whatever role he's allowed to play. Remember, he played striker for Cal in college, and he's played on the wing, and he's played right back, and he's played left back, and he played right wing back, and he played this right wing back position where he's slotted into a defensive midfield spot. And then moving on to Jackson Yueill, what's interesting about Jackson is that he has so many tools in his toolkit that's different than Tyler Adams, or that's different than just your regular central midfield player. He's the guy that can pick a pass. He's pretty technical. His physicality is totally different than your traditional American defensive midfielder, Michael Bradley kind of type. Would never put him in that kind of category. And so what Quakes fans should know is Nick Lima and Jackson Yueill are super unique and well poised if they want to be able to put their mark in this team, however Greg Berhalter wants to play. And we also don't know how Greg Berhalter totally wants to play, but it adds this.
I don't know if he knows how he wants to play.
They both add this really interesting dimension. I mean, Dest, you know, this very special player playing right back, but could he play in the midfield at some point? Could he play at right mid at some point? Could he do everything that Nick Lima does? I don't know, right? Because he's so young, we're not sure yet. Reggie Cannon, is he an out right back? I think he might be, right? And I don't know if he can do what Nick Lima does. So, okay, sure, you know, I'm coming from a Quakes perspective, but we have to credit the individuality of those guys and say to ourselves, you know what? Nick Lima can play all these different kinds of positions in a very unique way, and Jackson the same thing. So there's where I stand on it.
There you have it.
Des, by the way, can play left back. There's a good chance that we'll actually see him feature as a left back in this cycle. So we'll see. Let's
talk about playoff odds. Let's talk about what we've got on the playoff odds. Let's look at the table. And then I promise, my friends, we will get to your questions. I know there's a lot of them. Keep them coming, and appreciate your guys' support. We wouldn't be anywhere without you guys. This is your show, too. I want to make that very clear. Looking at the table, of course, LAFC running away with the first place position, up by almost 20 points. Real Salt Lake on 43, Seattle on 43, LA Galaxy 42, Minnesota 42, San Jose 41, Dallas 40. And then you got this kind of weird Portland Sporting KC thing with a 37-34, trying to maybe kind of duel it out for this 7th position.
And Portland do have a game in hand as well.
And Portland have the game in hand.
Portland has
right?
2 games in hand on FC Dallas.
Yeah.
So it could theoretically be a situation in which there is 3 points separating 2nd and 8th if Portland win their game in hand, which is absolutely ridiculous heading into the final, 7 games of this year.
And what I really like about this show is we've got 2 fantastic folks that have 2 different data analyses on this, but I'm going to go over to you, Alex Morgan, to talk about the 538 odds as well, and then we're going to go over to American Soccer Analysis.
So 538 has some of these teams ranked a little different than I would expect it, I think. What stands out to me is Portland, 82%. according to the 538 analysis. And I don't know if that's fully caught up with the fact that Portland has lost their last 2 games and aren't trending very well, and they're still on the outside looking in. That game in hand is only worth anything if they take advantage of it. Obviously, they have an easier run-in than some of these other teams. But I'm surprised that it's 82% considering the Quakes are only 74%. I'd say that's a pretty good point for the Quakes. 74% seems fair. You have Minnesota 73% and FC Dallas at 70%. So the Quakes still have their work cut out for them. It's very close, according to 538.
Yep, American Soccer Analysis, somewhat similar numbers. The Quakes fans might be heartened by a little bit of a boost. American Soccer Analysis has them at 79.1%. Their win against Vancouver got them an extra 3% over last week. The team that really kind of got the boost over the past week, or 2 of them, that was Seattle. Seattle, with their win on the road at Portland, was a big one for them. 2 teams that don't really have a good tactical identity, but really like to beat each other up.
A lot.
Seattle, yeah, a lot.
A lot. Yeah.
Seattle came away with the win. Their odds now sitting at 93.8% to make the playoffs, and 25.6 to secure the 2 seed. By the way, the Quakes, according to American Soccer Analysis, almost 7% to secure as high as the 2nd seed. The other team that got the bump was FC Dallas. FC Dallas with a big result last week as well. They are now sitting at 62.9%. So let me paint this particular picture for you, because what that means is that there are 8 teams that American Soccer Analysis have said are over 50% to make the playoffs. So basically, whatever percentage a team doesn't have to make the playoffs is added to a team below that. And FC Dallas, when you add up all those remaining percentages, they basically get what's left plus their own. That 62.9% is really kind of feeding them at this point. One of these teams is over 60% and will not make the playoffs, we know for sure.
Wow, that's pretty incredible stuff. I just got to say, what do you guys think? And what position do you think the Quakes will ultimately be in? This Western Conference table is just one of these, up and down, all the way from 2 to 7. It's super interesting. Let's talk about your guys' questions and dive in. And I'm going to go back all the way to the beginning here. Our guy Esteban Quesada, before we even went on air, he wrote this question, so I promise you I got you back. What are your thoughts on Fierro and Rios after watching them play this past Saturday? I'm not totally convinced on Fierro, but I'm convinced on Rio with their play/abilities.
Yeah, I think that's a good read. I'm not convinced about Fierro either at this point. As we said earlier in the show, I still don't think he's at 100%, and I don't know if he's ready to start against RSL if need be, given the Quakes' absences. But on the other hand, Fierro put in a really strong, Rios put in a really strong performance against Vancouver this past weekend. I liked him in the number 10 role. I think that added a new
we expected from these 2 individuals. I think we expected Fierro to more grab the brass ring, take his opportunity to be back with Almeida, and really kind of jump into a Espinoza type role. And so far we really haven't seen that, but we caught some glimpses of it against Vancouver. I'm optimistic there. I do think that with his performance against LAFC, when he was asked to play a bit of outside back position, I think he showed that he's not really ready for that yet, despite the fact so at this point, I don't see him, let's say, taking over an outside back position against RSL. I'm not going to say it won't happen. I just don't see why it would happen at this point.
And I think part of what this last couple of weeks have showed us is why the Quakes worked so hard to sign Andy Rios. That was a long transfer saga, them trying to get all their ducks in line and get all the pieces they needed to get him into the squad. Sources were telling us that it was essentially a done deal weeks before we got any official confirmation and before he was able to play with the team. This is why the Earthquakes worked so hard to secure him, because he's bringing immediate results to this team.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, with the Rios saga, it felt like you were watching a Nancy Drew novel, trying to figure out, or a James Bond film, trying to figure out, okay, is this going to happen, etc. What's the last plot twist to this? But Rios has performed really well. Fierro hasn't caught the eye just yet, but I think for Fierro and folks that would like to see him do well, I think he just needs a good confidence game, and you can see in the way that he plays right now. He's just not entirely right at this moment. Not to say that he's not fit enough for this team or this or that. I just think that he needs a breakout game where he's just solid, he's sturdy. There are too many times in the last 10-15 minutes that he gave the ball away. But I think he'll have that, and I do believe that he'll have a chance to impress at outside back as well. I don't think Matias Almeida is 100% with every one of the outside back positions. And then I think if he gets the game that he plays in the number 10 position, potentially, if he gets it, he'll have a little bit more freedom to show what he does, less defensive responsibilities, and enjoy it out there. So that's my bit on that.
He needs one soon, considering there are only 7 games left this year, and they all matter. But yeah, definitely looking forward to next season. It'll be interesting to see how he progresses, and there's lots of potential positive signs.
Yep.
Matthew Quesada writes, are you concerned that despite all the shots taken in one game that we aren't converting more often and getting more goals?
I'm not. Let me tell you why. Because the Quakes have been winning the expected goals battle 3 of the 4 games where they did not get points, or did not win, I should say. Before that, what we saw was an outburst, of shots, yes, but we also saw some quality chances come from that. The Quakes actually had, Colin and I mentioned this on a tweet earlier in the week, they actually tied for the largest disparity of expected goals ever recorded in the American Soccer Analysis tables, which go back to 2011. That's a few thousand games, right? So that's a pretty big deal, and it really shows that that they actually stepped up to the expected goals performance. Again, yes, it was against Vancouver, but I can't underscore the confidence part enough. I believe that most of the issues we saw in previous games were really more just a lack of confidence than anything else, and I believe that swagger, that confidence, I think they got it back. Yeah, you can pepper the goal with 40, but if 3 of them go in, you're going to win most of your games. That's good enough.
And look, I mean, it's fairly obvious to say, well, it's obvious when a player misses a chance he should have scored, and certainly the players are aware of that. We hear from Chris Wondolowski most every game, regardless of if he scored 1 or 2, that he should have finished the next chance because he's such a perfectionist in that way. But is it an underlying issue? I don't really think so.
No, and I don't think so either. I think there's plenty of opportunity for folks to kick on and score lots of goals still. And you know what? The Vancouver goalkeeper still made the most amount of saves ever in a single game. What was it 16 that you've got there? So for me, I still think there's lots of goals still to come. I'm going to quickly get an up and down vote from you guys, and then why. Javier Leon asks, is Espinosa staying for next season?
You want a thumbs up or down on this?
Yeah. You don't have to thumbs up. You can just say, yes, he is, because XYZ, or you can say, no, you don't.
Thumbs up.
Okay.
I don't know. I have to hedge this one just a little bit. If the performance that Espinosa has put in this season is going to give him the opportunity with his parent team, Real Sociedad, that he's been trying to get, I think he's going to have to take that, right? I think if they look at his performance and say, hey, that's a great step forward, we're going to put you on loan for another year somewhere, I think he's going to fight to stay in San Jose. I believe he does want to be here. But if you get the choice to play in La Liga, you're probably going to play in La Liga unless you're Carlos Fierro. Yeah. Or sorry, Carlos Vega.
If the opportunity is presented to him to play at that level, that's why he's here, to make his case for that for his parent club. So I wouldn't see him turning that down. But we've talked about it a lot in the show. The Quakes are going to try to do everything they can to keep him at this club, given the impact that he's made this season. And I am not in a position to give a thumbs up or down at this point. I don't have any inside information yet from the team regarding his situation. I think for the moment they're focused on this season, and I don't even know if those conversations have yet begun.
Sorry, home team Villarreal, not.
I was just going to chat about that. I'm giving the thumbs up, just based on the performances this year. Granted, he is 24 years of age, so there is still a lot of upside from him. But as you know, his parent club Villarreal, one of the consistent Europa League challengers in the Spanish league. But he's been on loan 4 times to Alaves, Valladolid, and Boca Juniors, and now at the Quakes. And so this is the most amount of experience that he's gotten. Being out on loan. And so I'm going to go on a limb and say yes. And I'm also going to go on a limb and say some of that money that they got from Anibal Godoy potentially could go to this. And look, the Quakes aren't stupid here. Jesse Fiorinelli has learned his lessons, especially after the Mikel Stare year. He's not a dumb puppy here. He knows that Espinosa is not just key to this side. He's key to a lot that the Quakes do, and also a fan favorite. I mean, the folks tuning into this show, I would assume that most people here are pretty behind Espinosa staying, or would like to see Espinosa stay, and like watching him play, right? Because he's fun to watch, and he gives a different dimension to this side, an out-and-out true winger. So I'm going to say he stays. For next season. Freddie Estrada, why do you think San Jose had such a hard time keeping their level of play? They seem to be flat and unfocused one week and brilliant the next one.
Well, it's difficult when you play the style of play that Matias Almeida is having his team do with such a high-intensity, man-marking style. We could sort of predict this at the start of the season that, now in this August going on September, October months, the team will be tired, considering that he's essentially had the same starting lineup now for a couple months. Those players are playing most of the 90 minutes. It's hard to keep the pace, and we've seen it too in game. It's been a concern that we've mentioned on the show, how the Quakes start the second half sometimes. Yep. Just because it's hard to maintain the level of intensity that the system requires for all 90 minutes.
Yeah, I'm a little bit less concerned about game-to-game changes. I'm a little bit more concerned with intra-game changes. I think it's important that if you start the game strongly, that you come out the second half and match the intensity that your opponent is going to bring to start that second half, and prevent them from feeling like they've got a hold of the game, such as happened, in some of those losses and the draw against Columbus.
Do you guys see that? Do you guys think that Paul Marie or Shea Salinas will be at left back while Lopez, Lima are away? We touched on this just a little bit, but let's segue to talk a little bit about Paul Marie, because we talked about him before we went on air. We all shared our opinions. But
we expect Shea Salinas to play in that left back role just because he's been seeing more consistent minutes. With Paul Marie, it's an interesting situation. He was getting good, solid bench minutes from the bench earlier in the summer and showing well for himself, but then he sort of fell off the face of the earth, and he hasn't been in the 18s. So I wouldn't expect that he plays against RSL.
I think he is more of a right-sider than some of the other players who can flex to both sides. I think he is much more strong when he just stays on the right side. So what I don't expect is that he's going to take Lima's spot. If there was some rest opportunity to be able to bring on Paul Marie, I believe it more likely would happen as the right midfielder, or for Tommy Thompson to give Tommy Thompson a game off.
And that question was from our friend Elicio Sandoval. A couple comments here again about the Matias Almeida situation. Our friend Eric Santiago from Mendocino County says another game suspension is completely ridiculous. Near 310 writes, yo, this Matias situation is absurd. Ren 1018 writes, ridiculous that we don't know how many games he'll be out. And if you guys missed the beginning of the show, Matias will be out for another match here at home against Orlando City. But, one of the biggest things here, and we just discussed, was the lack of transparency from the league, from the Referees Association, about what happened here. There was so much going on, and so it's important to you guys, the fans, to voice these opinions because it's your team, because you support this team, because we cover this team, because I grew up a fan of this team and still am. And so these are important things to say, and just want to make that pretty clear. But I still resonate with your guys' thoughts here about that. And
we've been just as baffled with the way it's been handled.
There's no more transparency to us than there has been to the general public.
It's been pretty disappointing, to say the least. Quakes break records, but no players in the starting team of the week except for Vancouver's goalkeeper. Thoughts?
Yeah, it's a little bit baffling. I think that the Quakes' dominance was actually such a team level performance. It was almost difficult to pick out one player. You had goals from 3 different players. You had Magnus Eriksson with 2 assists. You had pretty much every single player who was on the pitch playing at or above their standard level that you expect from them. And I think, the team of the week, consideration just was a little bit confusing. And, the Quakes game against Vancouver happened, a bit earlier than some of the other games. There were more Sunday games that came on, and people really were just gaga over the Galaxy and LAFC games and things like that. And, it became kind of an afterthought how much the Quakes dominated that particular game. Not only that, didn't do any favors. I was actually on the East Coast during the game, watching on my little phone on ESPN Plus. That's been a bit of a godsend this season. But I can tell you from being on the East Coast, not very many people on the East Coast are staying up to watch the Quakes in Vancouver. So I think some of the people who are voting in these games may not be seeing these games live as well.
Even though it's one of the most heated rivalries in Major League
Right.
Soccer.
If not the most heated rivalry in Major League Soccer.
Seriously. Yeah, and honestly, I don't even know off the top of my head who I would pick to be a standout performer for the Quakes because it was such a team effort.
I liked Eriksson. I think he should have been a starter, not a bench player. I think Eriksson was a good pick.
I think Judson. Just my opinion. Just coming back to him
every week.
And it is disappointing, Karn, that the Quakes don't get in the team of the week, week in, week out. But that's why we have this show. That's why it's important to promote soccer in this community, because there isn't a lot of this type of stuff around in the league either. And you have, some other names in this flashy El Tráfico rivalry, but the Quakes are the Quakes. They are a legacy team. They don't get the attention that they deserve, and that's really unfortunate. But we try our best week in, week out to give them the coverage that they deserve, and the work that Matias Almeida and the rest of this squad, who had been written off at the beginning of the year,
by us,
by us, and some other media folks as well. Not just it.
Weren't
but,
alone.
There's always going to be a challenge here, and we got to just continue building each other up and growing together. And so that's kind of my long-winded 35,000-foot view answer to your question. But thanks, everybody, for tuning into our program. We are Black and Azul. You can find us on Facebook, on Twitter, as well on Instagram at Black and Azul, all one word. Joel Soria is not here tonight, but a member of our team. I've got Alex Morgan here, Jamon Moore here, and we can't forget our wonderful producers that put this together week in, week out for you. Aaron Sholl, who is our associate producer, Jason Sholl, who is our executive producer and director of the program, and a new member of our team, guys. Shout out to Daniel Nicoretti, who is one of our assistant producers as well on this show, who just joined the team today. So shout out to Daniel, and shout out to you guys for your questions and your comments and your feedback. Any feedback is good feedback, folks. Thanks so much for tuning in. We will see you next week for episode number 29 of Black and Azul. See you guys later. Cheers.